The garments we sleep in aren't just cozy afterthoughts. They are literal artifacts of human survival. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to track exactly what ordinary people wore to bed across the centuries. And by looking closely at the material culture of sleep, we can actually reconstruct entire human worlds, from the freezing, damp stone chambers of the Middle Ages all the way to the chemically engineered comforts we enjoy today. Let's dive in. To really understand this journey, we have to completely hit reset on our modern expectations. Seriously, think about it for a second. What did a medieval peasant wear to bed? If you're imagining a thick woven nightgown or maybe some comforting woolen trousers, well, we need to immediately challenge that assumption about how our ancestors lived, and more specifically, how they survived the long, dark night.
The reality? Nakedness. Total nakedness was the consensus for lay people in the Middle Ages, and that spanned the entire social hierarchy, from the absolute poorest peasants up to the highest monarchs. And the reason for this comes down to the sheer, harsh economic reality of the era. See, before the Industrial Revolution, every single thread of clothing required grueling, back-breaking hours of hand-spinning and hand-weaving. Fabric was an incredibly precious, scarce commodity. So to protect their daytime garments from unnecessary wear and tear, people just slept entirely naked. Owning a secondary set of clothes exclusively for sleep, that was an unthinkable luxury for almost everyone.
Now, to really grasp what sleeping exposed actually meant, we have to contrast our perfectly climate-controlled modern bedrooms with the historical reality. I want you to imagine a drafty timber or stone chamber. The air holds this biting, damp chill that just seeps right through the walls. Open hearths, which were once warm, inevitably burned down to cold ashes in the middle of the night. The sensory reality of this microclimate was harsh, it was freezing, and quite frankly, it was fundamentally dangerous to a vulnerable human body. So let's talk about surviving the medieval night. Because they couldn't just rely on dedicated sleepwear to protect their skin, our ancestors had to essentially engineer their physical surroundings. They turned their furniture into survival technology. The canopy bed literally acted as a tightly sealed room within a room. Heavy curtains made of wool, fustian, or thick velvet were drawn tightly closed, trapping the sleeper's body heat to form a really critical thermal barrier against the creeping cold. And beyond that, a solid canopy physically protected the sleeper from falling thatch, dust, and insects dropping from the ceiling. The human head, however, was still exposed outside the covers. And this is where nightcaps come in, which were deeply tied to the medical and scientific consensus of the time. Nightcaps weren't just for being cozy, they were essentially medical devices used to shield the skull from drafts, miasmic night air, and, get this, the widely feared pathological moon rays. Yes, direct exposure to the moon's light was legitimately thought by leading physicians to cause brain damage, facial spasms, and mental illness. It's actually the very root of the word lunacy. So a thick linen or wool coif was quite literally your nightly armor against the cosmos. Moving on to linen, hygiene, and morale. As we move into the 17th and 18th centuries, the architecture of sleep shifted right alongside an evolving understanding of human health. During this era, the medical consensus actually warned that hot water would open the pores and allow deadly diseases to enter the body. Because people largely stopped bathing in water, they started relying entirely on a single piece of fabric for cleanliness. It was called the chemise or the shift. Worn closest to the skin by both men and women, this shapeless garment was made of linen. And because of its highly absorbent flax fibers, the linen acted as a literal proxy for bathing. It actively drew perspiration, sebum, and impurities completely away from the skin. So the wearer relied on this natural absorbency to essentially pull dirt right out of their body, transferring those impurities to the fabric overnight. Then, instead of washing their physical body, they subjected the linen to the vigorous, incredibly harsh labor of wash day. Immersed in boiling water and caustic lye, the fabric was scrubbed and bleached mercilessly. Because of this cycle, the stark visual contrast of blindingly white cuffs and collars against unwashed skin became a primary marker of social hierarchy. An abundance of bright, frequently changed linen signaled undeniable wealth and, by extension, cleanliness. Then, the 19th century brought the Industrial Revolution, and with it, the absolute game changer, the sewing machine. This mechanization transformed that simple linen shift into a highly structured cotton garment, driven largely by an intense cultural focus on moral purity. These Victorian nightgowns featured high collars, long sleeves, and these heavy, floor-sweeping hems. The physical sensation was literally one of being encased in heavy, restrictive yards of cloth. The sleeping body was strictly disciplined and completely covered up.
It was a perfect reflection of the era's incredibly rigid societal strictures. Which brings us to the colonial pajama revolution. While Western women were basically swathed in all that conservative cotton, a massive shift in global trade and imperialism completely revolutionized menswear. As the British Empire expanded into South Asia, colonizers and soldiers encountered the oppressive, suffocating heat of the tropics, and this climate totally forced them to abandon their heavy European garments. Instead, they favored traditional local attire that was perfectly suited for the environment. The pajama. Stemming from Persian and Hindi words translating to leg garment, this referred to loose, lightweight drawstring trousers. Recognizing just how functionally superior this was, colonists brought this highly breathable concept back to Europe. And let me tell you, the impact on men's fashion was swift and absolute. For centuries, European men had slept in these restrictive, dress-like nightshirts that just tangled around their legs all night. The Eastern-inspired pajama offered this incredibly liberating alternative. Men eagerly abandoned the nightshirt for luxurious two-piece sets. Crafted from lightweight cotton or the elegant drape of striped silk, the pajama completely and permanently redefined the standard for masculine comfort in the West. Interestingly, this garment, which was born of tropical necessity, then underwent a profound sociological evolution in the 20th century. Pioneering designers like Coco Chanel adopted these Eastern influences in the 1920s, creating silk beach pajamas that finally liberated women from the suffocating modesty of the Victorian era. By the 1930s, the pajama had actually elevated into glamorous evening wear. And as the feminist movement really gained momentum in the 1970s, women fully embraced unisex loungewear, declaring once and for all that personal comfort and mobility trumped archaic societal expectations. All right, let's see how technology transforms the bedroom. Okay, so the greatest change to what we wear to bed wasn't actually a fashion trend at all. It was a feat of domestic engineering that completely destroyed the need for centuries of nocturnal survival attire. Historians call it the thermal collapse of sleepwear. It was a profound environmental conquest. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, widespread residential central heating became a reality. Once bedrooms were artificially heated, the functional necessity for heavy survival gear just evaporated. The insulating nightcap vanished. Bed curtains were replaced by open metal frames. It fundamentally altered the human condition and our entire relationship with the night. Simultaneously, the chemical revolution completely flipped the script on the structural attributes of the clothes closest to our skin, democratizing luxury in the process. For millennia, humanity relied on labor-intensive natural fibers, like flax and cocoons. But the 20th century introduced this somewhat bizarre, laboratory-engineered reality. Semi-synthetics like rayon offered a cheap alternative to silk, followed incredibly quickly by fully synthetic polymers that forever altered how fabrics draped, how they stretched, and how they felt against the human body. Now, the absolute most pivotal year in this chemical textile revolution was 1938. This was a major historical turning point because it was the year chemical companies introduced nylon to the world. Born from an industrial alchemy of coal, air, and water, nylon was highly elastic, incredibly strong, and far, far cheaper to produce than delicate silk. Its economic impact was just staggering. It rapidly dominated sleepwear, giving rise to the affordable, mass-produced sheer negligées and synthetic sets that defined the mid-20th century. So we can now step back and observe a really profound historical contrast. We've gone from the desperate, shivering medieval peasant wrapped in a wool-draped bed, just trying to survive the freezing stone, to the modern sleeper, swathed in chemically engineered fabrics within a perfectly centrally heated environment. The constraints of geography, climate, and scarce resources that once so strictly dictated our bedtime routines, they've been thoroughly conquered by technology and global exchange. So the next time you turn off the lights and slip into your sleepwear, remember, you aren't just getting comfortable. You are wearing the end result of a centuries-old story of human survival, technological triumph, and cultural exchange. There is an incredible living history woven right into the very fabric you sleep in. Keep questioning the deep history behind your everyday world.